Good evening, Thando Book Club lovers. It is a pleasure to have you with us. And tonight, I know we started a little bit early, but technology sometimes has days where it just is a little bit moody. But we are here and we're going to get raring to go. And we are proud and honored to have with us Ms. Tine Jakarasi, and she will be sharing with us about her book. Hi, Tine, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I am doing good.
That's good. That's good. We like to hear that.
Yeah. You just look absolutely amazing. Just before we started the live, everybody who's watching, Tine was actually sharing with me that she does her makeup on her own. And I'm like, that is so professionally looking. That is wild. I love that.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, all this COVID downtime, hey, we're picking up new hobbies and watching YouTube videos and all of that.
Amen to that. I've picked up a few hobbies of my own. It was so funny, like when COVID began, because we were now all watching each other's WhatsApp statuses. Everybody was always baking something. So like the whole of last year, like everybody became a cook. It was so interesting. I was like, wow, a lot of people were like, okay, we just have to be creative and get through this the best way that we can.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as is my custom, I like to start every book club with a quote. And today I'm deviating from my usual quotes. My quotes are usually an African proverb or a quote from a book from an African author. But today, my quote is actually going to be from the book, the Bible. And it's because this quote in particular makes me think of you. It makes me think of the conversations we've had in the run-up to the book club. And the quote is from Proverbs 3, and it's verse 5. And I'm going to read today from the Message version. Trust God from the bottom of your heart. Don't try to figure out everything on your own. Listen for God's voice in everything you do, everywhere you go. He's the one who will keep you on track. Don't assume that you know it all. And when I saw that verse, I was like, there's no better quote, no better message that encapsulates your journey and your story. And even like what we're going through right now than that particular scripture. So I deviated, but every time I encounter you, it's just because you're really just one author that's very, very special to me. You've captured me in a special way, captivated me in a special way.
Thank you so much.
That's my scripture for you, or rather my quote to open up the book club. Now, to our viewers, we are very happy to have you joining us from Facebook and YouTube. Please let us know where you are watching from. And if you have ever heard of Tine before or her book, Turning Pain into Power. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the book. The book, Turning Pain into Power, brings to light the importance of women's health. It touches on women's health injustices, although it's a personal piece about the life of the author and how she's dealt with pain. This book touches on a plethora of themes. It speaks on rejection, betrayal, and loss, but it is also a story about courage, tenacity, and resilience, and looking adversity straight in the eye. This book is for anyone. This book will challenge you. Learn how to turn your pain into power with this powerful read. And our author today is Ms. Tine Jakarasi. She is passionate about all things women and children and community development. She's the founder of As I Am Foundation and Zimbabwe Endometriosis Support Network, a very important organization that has been needed for a very long time. She has been in the community development sector for many years, and her work has gotten her accolades, such as Most Inspirational Woman, Obama Foundation Leader, and Top 20 Most Influential Young People in Zimbabwe, amongst other titles. So welcome, Tine. Why don't you kick us off by telling us how Turning Pain into Power became a book?
So where do I start? From the beginning, I guess. I feel like in life, we basically have two choices. You know, people say all these things, sink or swim, you know, and I think you only really understand such quotes and such statements when you're in the position. So for me, I always like to go to the very beginning. In my teens, actually, when I started my period, I was 9. I didn't know that was wrong at the time. I also was living with my dad. My parents had just separated. And so I was living with my dad. And of course, at school, and, you know, I've had these conversations with so many people because of the line of my work about what is your first period story? Like, what happened? Who spoke to you, etc. For me, it was a teacher, you know, my teacher who then had to then tell my dad. And now when I look back at it, I'm like, that was unnecessary. I should have been able to just say, you know what, Dad, I started my period. But it was fine. It didn't give me any hassles. It was just that I was one of the girls who started earlier in school. And yeah, that was just that, like some other women experience that the period is just a period. In my teens now, I started to feel very weird, chronic type of side pains, as well as abnormal bleeding. And initially, the first or second month, you don't notice it. You just think, oh, this month has been heavier than the other month, until I noticed that it was actually starting to become a problem. And at that time, I'm in Form 3 or 4, and you are in that IGSE thing, and that's what matters in life. You know, Form 3s and Form 4s would know, like, that's what life is about. That's what your parents are expecting you to be doing, focusing on your O levels, and your teachers are just pushing for you to pass. So I'm in that space of mind, but there's something else that's happening in my body that I don't understand. I saw countless doctors, and, you know, the first thing they said to me was, you're writing exams, you know, maybe you're one of those people who really internalizes things, you must be stressed out. And initially I'm like, okay, I was put on certain medication, it didn't work. I went for countless tests. I was told I had kidney stones. I was told I had bilharzia. I was told I even had an STI, and I was not even sexually active. And this is where it comes from in the book, where I speak about women's social injustices, you know. And at the time, I'm a minor as well, so I can't really make decisions for myself. And so this went on through high school. You know, initially I thought I would have a solution and that would be it. But then I literally finished high school, and by then I become a shell of myself, lost weight, lost confidence. The other girls are going on for 2-3 days and they can do things. I miss school because I'm on my period. I'm now labeled the sick girl. Even the kind teachers kind of treat you a little differently, because it's like you almost like break. And I would even have certain relatives who would make jokes like, oh, we don't have Tine because she'll break, you know. Anyway, long story cut short, after my high school experience, everyone else goes to school and they've got this. I don't know if you remember it when you were in school, or for other people who are watching, that, you know, upper 6 is also a very big year. People are discussing about where they're going, what they're doing. And for me, I couldn't relate to that because I'm dealing with a health issue that affects my everyday life. But I still had dreams. I still had aspirations. I wanted to go to the UK and study law. So funny that I'm not even doing that. Study law because I was quite an astute student. And that for me made sense. You know, you leave the country, you become this top lawyer, you come back and you're doing well. And that didn't happen. And then shortly after that, I then moved in with my mom because we noticed this was actually becoming very, very serious. I went and started living with my mom, and that's when we started looking for answers. We would Google, you can't really find concrete answers. When you type out women's health conditions or issues, the symptoms overlap. So you can't really pinpoint and say, I've got fibroids, or I've got PCOS, or I've got endo. But endo did stick to me. You know, one thing I do want to speak about is intuition, or for Christians, you call it the Holy Spirit, you know, where you're like, this sounds like me. And again, I went to doctors and I was told, well, first of all, women of your color don't get diseases like that. It's a white woman's disease. Secondly, you're too young to be experiencing stuff like this. Again, you must be promiscuous. And I am someone who is very faith-filled, and even at school as part of Scripture Union. And even then, they just, I was bullied so much because it was, the Scripture Union girl gets sick. Oh, she probably, aborted. It was a lot, hey? So anyway, I then traveled to South Africa. I've got an idea of what I think is wrong. I even have an operation here and they misdiagnosed me. I then traveled to South Africa. When I've now realized this is 2013, 2014, that time, Facebook was very, very big. So I now realize there is actually a community, not in Zim, in the UK and the States, of women who are going through what I'm going through. And so I then fly to South Africa, I see a doctor, and imagine after this is about 5 years of just searching for a diagnosis, 10, 15 minutes of examining me. He says, this is endometriosis. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been telling doctors this for years. And that's how I sort of got my first, I won't say formal, because usually a lot of these conditions are diagnosed by a laparoscopy when they can actually see what's wrong. But he was very convinced that, look, you definitely have it, let's treat it. But unfortunately, at that time, I was already termed stage 4 endometriosis. It has stages. So I've got my diagnosis now, and now I have to deal with actually managing the issue. And so that's where my story starts. I've always been a writer, so I used to write my feelings and my thoughts, but I never really sat down to be like, okay, I'll write a whole book. But as I grew, as I began to do a lot of research, and then also in 2014, I'm like, this is weird. Why don't we have support like this in Zim? I look around, and there's nothing. And so turning pain into power started in that moment where I said, I'm dealing with this pain. I've got chronic pain. I've lost 3-4 years of school. There's something that I must do with this. And that's how the journey of turning pain into power starts. And so I start the support group. And at the time also, talking about periods was pretty taboo. It still is, but people are a lot more receptive now, but then that was Facebook, and I'm sharing my experience, and I'm getting bashed, and I'm being told, it's a secret thing, it's a private thing. But for me, I'm so convicted because of what I went through. I'm like, how many other women have been through that? And so, another thing when it comes to women's health is it seems to be dirty and there's a lot of stigma. So it was very, very hard to get women to actually join the group. But people started to join slowly. And then at that point, I was like, okay, like I said, either I sink or I swim. I started this foundation. I've started another foundation, community work. I always wanted to be in the community development sphere. I always wanted to do psychology, but I was told it's not a smart profession. You're too smart for that profession. But then I get to the point where my peers have even finished their first degree. I haven't started. What does life mean for me? First of all, I need to do exactly what I need to do and follow my calling and my purpose. And so I just went for it, and I applied for UNISA, and I did a degree in community and health psychology. Meanwhile, I'm writing, and first of all, you start writing on paper, and then you go onto the laptop and you start to see it flowing. And I truly, truly believe it was God and the Holy Spirit just speaking to me through the story. And it was so painful because I had to go right back to the beginning of what I went through to tell the actual story. And so I'm writing and I'm writing and I'm writing and I'm writing and I'm writing. And before I know it, it's a whole book. And I then sit down, I'm like, what do I call this book? And I'm like, it's Turning Pain into Power, because in the book, there's three sort of phases in the book, right? There's the symptoms of how it started. And then we get into the pain part of, okay, all the horrible things that have happened. Now I've had 4 surgeries, I've been on chemo. And then there's the pain part. And despite everything that's happened, my message to the world, or what I believe is my calling, is to remind people that whatever situation you're going through, you can turn that pain into power. And so that's the Turning Pain into Power story.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Amazing, because whenever you tell this story, like at the beginning, it's just like where, how will it end? There's definitely a lot of suspense, and it's very captivating. And then when you start sharing about how all of this pain, the rejection, and the trauma led to this birth in terms of this book. And then like this cause and the sisterhood in terms of what you do through As I Am Foundation, but what you do with your Endo sisters is very, very powerful and very, very inspiring. And this is why this book for me remains one of my personal classics, because I think it's the intent behind it and the truth that's told through it is something that really, I think, illustrates the power of writing and sharing our story. Because endometriosis is something that's so misunderstood. It's something that is so, it's so mysterious. It's so narrowly, you can narrowly miss it, and it can make a big difference to how somebody lives, the quality of their life and their vulnerability. Yeah. And like you're actually shining a light on something that a lot of people need to know. And it's not just people who suffer from the condition, it's also the rest of us in our society to maybe rethink some of our responses and the way that we're showing up for people who are not well. So I really I've always found that story very, very inspiring. I wanted to ask you, how did you manage the aspect of writing about something that was so intimate and personal about yourself? Because often that's always the challenge when you're writing a personal story, because to what extent do you expose other people, right? You, and especially your intimate people like your parents, and people like school teachers, people like this and like this and like this. And I found that the way that you did that was quite skillful. But what kind of rules or guidelines did you use to manage the division between the personal and the professional? So
when I was still sort of working on the manuscript, it was very raw and it was very real, and it was something else. I think in the very beginning of it, it was also very therapeutic. And another reason why I started writing the book, I was like, the narrative needs to change. The narrative of women who have menstrual issues is always, they're the barren women. You highlighted that people kind of forget about quality of life. Most women that I encounter, the thing that they're worrying the most about is acceptance. Will I be able to have children? And as someone who's sort of lived with this for 15 years, I'm like, I've been there. You have a picture of what it looks like. And because it's actually, people tend to think, because I'm in Zim, I know other people are watching and they're not in Zim, but they tend to think because we're in Africa, maybe we don't get the best help. It's a worldwide and global issue where they just don't know how to treat this thing. And so initially I was writing, and it's therapeutic, and it was intensely painful because there's some things I realized I had sort of repressed even. And you start going back and you realize like there was a bit of abuse here. There was a bit of this here. And so initially I wrote it as raw as possible. And then I sat down and thought about what is the intention of the book. The intention of the book is to create awareness. The intention of the book is to create the narrative. And although there are people who are involved, such as parents and family members who some were not so great, some were amazing, I made the decision to speak about myself and what I'm going through, because it can be very damaging for how other people see it. The thing about life also is that I remember when I had this journey, it's very different the way I look at it now. Back then, I was so upset with everyone, the doctors, family members. But what are they supposed to do if a medical professional is saying there's nothing wrong with her? You know, and I think sometimes we don't look at it like that. We just sulk and say, why are they acting this way? But they're taking it from a medical professional who has said there's nothing wrong with her. And I know it even got to the point where a medical professional said, I think she needs psychological help. And these are your parents now who are in the middle of it thinking, okay, but we can see our daughter is not okay. We can see ABCD, but her scans are coming out normal. And that was very, very hard for us to navigate, but they did the very best that they could. And the fact that they continued to help me fight and find answers for me was incredibly, I feel so appreciative, but they were bad moments as well. And so for me, when I now decided what the intention of my book was, I said, there's no need to talk about dramas and all these things that happen, because, you know, you realize with these tell-all books, a lot of stuff happens because you tend to forget that these are family members and people you still have to deal with, you know. You have decided to write the book, so try to be respectful of their part, you know, in the book. And so I tried my best to make it to be tactful. There are one or two things that people can pick up, but again, I said, I am doing this for me and for the women who come after me, the women who've come before me, the women who are not able to maybe articulate and write, because although we have different stories, we have the same story, which is lack of awareness, lack of support from family and friends. But yeah, it was quite very interesting. The number of times I had to change certain words, certain phrases to protect the people around me, because you're constantly learning and they're constantly learning as well. And so if you're writing from a place of 5 years ago, in 5 years, a lot of things can change, but that book is out there already. And that's what sticks, you know, with people. So that's how I personally decided to take it and say, let me use my account. Let me sift. And this book is not to bash people. It's not to expose people. And yeah, that's how I dealt with it. But I mean, even then, you know, it was amazing that one of my uncles, some people don't know how to deal with it. And he was never horrible or whatever. But when he read the book, he drove to my house to say, I am so sorry. And I was so touched. And I'm like, but you didn't do anything. And he's like, no, that's the thing. When I read the book, I realized I was watching you every single day and just assuming she's fine. But when I read it and it was on paper, I felt like I really should have done more. And I was so touched. And that's the kind of effect I wanted for people who are reading to be like, how can I do more? I'm a young mother, or I have kids. What can I take from this book in order to help my daughter, And so, yeah, it really comes down to intention. It really, really comes down to intention and what's the message you want to give to people? You have to think about that.
I love that. How can I do more? I love that. But that leads me to my next question, which is, how has the book been received, and what has surprised you about the way that the book has been received?
So, I'll be very honest here. I think I don't know whether to call it book club, but as aspiring writers and new writers and people who are in this world, especially in the Zim community, I think we're still lacking a lot of support. I feel like a TDG Jakes book will come out, and there's no question about it because he's TD Jakes. And then a Tine will write a book. And yes, I would like to say mine has been well received, but it can be so much better because, first of all, people look and they're like, who is she? Okay. And so I feel like for African storytellers, we are at a disadvantage because maybe we're not famous enough, I think for me, my first edition, I was going with sort of the standard that I see here in Africa and Zim. And then someone pointed out to me and was like, you know what, the other thing sometimes is also how your book looks. And so I then changed that. I think I involved you in that and said, look, I'm trying to change it and change a few things. And you know what? That actually really helped. It's more or less the same book, but just the way it looked, the way it felt. And for me, I was even scared. And I was like, but if we then put it at a certain quality, then we have to sell it at a certain price. Are people going to buy? But I guess we have to start to raise that standard because our stories matter and our stories are great. It's just that I think we're in an environment that sort of works against us. And my fellow writers, when I speak to them, it's the same thing. We're sitting and we're talking and saying, okay, how can we keep the marketing going? Because even for a writer, you tend to have sort of a burnout. You feel like you've used your friends, your family, the groups, the this and that, and people have bought. But, the beautiful things about books is they never run, they never get old. Stories never get old. And I think that's something I find difficult and other writers find difficult to keep it going, and to get people to understand that, look, we actually can write well, So I don't know. I think it's something we have to look at as people in this little community of how we can get people to really be invested and believe that our craft is worth it.
Very, 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 very interesting about the support for local writing. Yeah. And and people don't realize that there is such diversity and such breadth in terms of what people are writing about, and that people can actually write well. And good tip about, the way that the book looks. So one of the things that I'd like, just before we turn to how everything is now, what advice would you give a budding writer? So somebody's like, I also want to write my book. From your journey in publishing, your response, and just your process that you've gone through, because you're now in your second edition, what advice would you give a budding writer?
So first of all, I would say use the resources. I know you're a great resource to speak to. Ask people. Not everyone is receptive, but there are also a lot of people who are receptive. So ask around, ask people about their journeys, what they've been through. Sometimes make the sacrifices that you need to make. And I'm speaking from first edition where I didn't have much funds. So in my mind, I was like, let me just get it out there, which is also great because I always say just start. And then when things sort of got financially better, I'm like, okay, I can afford to change the cover and do this and fix this and fix this and speak to this person. So use the community, because there is quite a good community of writers. I think another thing would be just remain authentic. I think we also have imposter syndrome of, will this story matter? And so for me, because I'm in a little bit of in a different field, in the women's health field, and, I talk about very taboo subjects, you tend to think, who's going to read it? But you'll be surprised that there are people who are actually looking for your content. They just don't know that it's out there. And so, number one thing, just start, research, get the resources, talk to people. Self-publishing, I think, is a way to go as well. I did it the other way the first time, and it was a complete nightmare. And I know you advised me that self-publishing is the way to go. You want to have ownership over, your things. And so this second time around, I managed to make sure, everything I manage everything. And just believe in yourself, believe in the story. Okay, you might write your first book, it might not be great, but you learn from it, so that would be my advice for like budding writers. People talk about writer's block and all of this and that, but I think a lot of the times it's just that we're just not confident enough that this story matters, especially African stories. You find that with Endo books, I think mine is the only one out there worldwide that's been written by a Black woman. I think it also comes down to culture and tradition, that a lot of us have been, when we grow up, we've been told to just keep quiet. And so, going back to that other question, certain family members were like, how can she, really air out her dirty laundry? And so when I was doing research, I was like, all these books that have been written on this subject are not by women of color. Why? And sometimes you can't even relate to it because you're different, And so you really have to believe in yourself and remind yourself there is a market. There is a market for, if it's a cooking book, there is a market for somebody who wants an authentic Zimbabwean cooking book. So yeah, those would be my tips.
Those are great tips. Great tips for anybody who is wanting to write and planning to write. I think that's a really good roadmap. So here's what fascinates me about you. The story in terms of living life with Endo is still very much in play. So you still are battling this condition. It's a chronic condition. It places you in the vulnerable category. And it is something that when people read the book, and when I read the book, I was like, wow, I mean, how do you have time to do anything else but feel ill? But you do so much, and you manage to show up for events, events like this even. You're out there in the community, you are moving, you are traveling, you are doing and doing and doing. How do you manage that?
I think it's a mind battle. It's really a mind battle. There's a very fine line, and I hope people won't I won't ruffle people's feathers, but there's a very fine line between taking care of yourself and then also allowing something to consume you, right? And I think that's very different for everyone. I've been in both places. Like I mentioned, the first 5 years, I was a completely different teenager. I was very withdrawn. I'm actually very shocked that I can talk that much. I was very withdrawn. I think I felt a bit of shame, like, why am I going through this? What a lot of people don't understand, with issues of blood, like even that the story in the Bible of the women with the issue of blood, just try to think of that. There comes a lot of shame with that. And I've experienced that. And it sounds like it's easy peasy, but I literally had to go through the valley first and experience the valley and be depressed and not in school and hide from peers because they're going to ask me what you're doing. And my answer is, I'm sick. I mean, nobody gets that, You have relatives that say, and you're trying to explain that I can't sit in the chair in New Z. My high school experience for me was, I even say, I think there's a bit of post-traumatic issues there because it was so hard and I couldn't just quit. And so, I imagine going to school with a hot water bottle and this and that just to manage the day. And for me, I just said, I want to go back there. And that's how I ended up distance learning. And so I went through that very dark space where you're literally like a blob. You're just in bed. You're taking painkillers. You're not making decisions because your answer to everything is, but I can't. I can't go to school because I can't sit in a chair. I can't do this because I can't. And then I literally one day sat down, was writing an account book, and I was like, okay, these are the problems. How can we make a solution? I can't go to school physically, but I can do online schooling. Okay, that's solved. So I enroll with UNISA. I want to do this NGO work, but can I do it? And I'm like, but you know what? You don't have to do it every day. And so I just got into it and I started to learn. And with my NGO work, I joined a certain organization first just to see how it goes. And it's sort of being my own boss and really managing. There's something called the spoon theory. And the spoon theory means that, and it can work for anybody really, not for people with chronic pain, is that we're all different individuals. We know, or I'm productive for 3-4 hours a day. After that, I can't be productive. And it's more or less the same thing with people who have chronic issues that okay, I usually have enough energy to get up and take a bath and have a meal and I'm back in bed. So what I usually do is I plan way in advance to say, okay, I need to work. So I've got a workshop today, which means I'm going to put a bit of pressure on my body. I'm going to maybe need to take a little extra painkiller. So if that's on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, I rest. So I manage it, What I have refused is to go back to where I was before, which was the dark place. And so when I speak to people and they tell me I'm in a dark place, I say, yes, I've been there. I was there. And I had to make a choice. And the thing is, my parents couldn't even be like, Tine, go to work, because they know I can't. And so for me, it's been about just making a choice and understanding there are days and times where I'm like, okay, this week is a bad week. Let's rest. We're going to rest. Let's recharge. I say it's like a battery. Let's recharge. And then we'll deal with it again next week. And so the funny thing is when I speak to people, they're like, you're doing so much. But in my mind, I'm getting frustrated and saying, I'm not doing a lot. But it's just helped me to plan, to be realistic, but also sometimes to fight. I'm like, you know what? This needs to be done. I'm not going to die. I might experience a little bit of pain. But it's going to be for a few hours and I'll come back and I'll rest. And that's the sink or swim that I keep talking about. Either you sink or you swim, You've got to turn that pain into power, because otherwise the truth is no one is going to save you. Everyone else's lives are moving on. And that's something I used to struggle with. Like, you're on Facebook and you're seeing your peers, they're moving on and you're not doing anything, but you're in charge of making that change. People can only then support you and sometimes they won't. So you need to kind of take charge and be like, okay, some people perform at 100. I perform at 40. Let me make the best of that 40, and so that's how I sort of managed to keep things going.
I love that. Love the spoon theory. And for those of you who haven't read Tine's book, Turning Pain into Power, you can get a copy on Amazon, or you can get in touch with her directly on her Facebook page. And what is exciting about the book is many of the things she's talked about with us today are in the book, including how she manages herself and her time, because she takes us from the beginning, not knowing what it was, through getting the diagnosis, through quite a lot of the treatments and surgeries she's done to date, not obviously counting some of the more recent ones, and then obviously how she is managing the day-to-day. So there's actually a lot in the book in terms of anyone facing a challenging situation. And for me, the book is really, really timely to discuss on this book club, because I think the world is at a point where we're kind of over it. We're like, I'm done with this whole pandemic story. But it's something we're all going through at the same time, and it's something that's incredibly hard. You get messages on your phone daily. Everybody has this experience. Somebody's either sick, somebody's passed on, and very few times are you getting the message that somebody's come out of hospital. And this isn't always about COVID. I mean, people have other issues that are going on that are being exacerbated. Just because, the system is so overwhelmed with dealing with COVID. And so for you right now, just before we wrap up and do our reading, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, or to have you just share a little bit about, so how are you managing in the season, in this time, where we've gone over 18 months in the pandemic. You're definitely in a vulnerable category because of your chronic condition. And now more than ever is when the community of Endo sisters needs each other and needs to kind of stick together and support each other. But there's also an element in terms of there has to be sheltering in, especially during the peaks of waves and things like that. And then added to that, I think this is a very real thing that all of us are having to battle, which is the waves of anxiety. I know I've personally had to battle it where, during certain months, all of a sudden, irrational and deep, debilitating anxiety just sort of arrests you. And then you look around and you see it in the eyes of everybody else around you as well. And you realize that we're all trying to process this large-scale trauma at the same time. How is that working for you personally? How's that working for you in the community that you've built?
So I think in my book, where we sort of ended was, I think, third operation or something. So yeah, we will be working on a part 2 to come. Well, anyway, I'll touch about that in the reading, because it's in the reading, something that I want to touch on at the end. So for women with endometriosis and women's health conditions, I remember when COVID started, we were all in this uproar and like, oh my gosh, we're part of the vulnerable communities. And there was a lot of debates. Some doctors said no, some doctors said yes, some doctors said it depends what type of endo you have. But at the end of the day, we know because our bodies are fighting every single day. For example, a lot of us struggle from chronic fatigue. So I can have a 10-hour night where I'm like, okay, I'm sleeping for 10 hours and I'll still wake up pretty tired. And so your body is working overtime because remember, our bodies were not designed to be sick. And then we're taking painkillers and we're taking this. So already our immunity is not as strong as everyone else's. I know before I even got a proper diagnosis, I used to get strep throat a lot. And, it became so, normal in the family. Tine always gets flu, Tine always gets flu. And then when things started together, I realized, oh, you know what? Because I was fighting, chronic pain, bleeding abnormally, if I just come across somebody with even strep throat, or flu, I would get it like that. So it starts to make sense. And a lot of us, well, fortunately, because of the condition, we do take extra multivitamins and stuff like that. And we do a lot of herbal stuff. So that's sort of helped. But it also is very unfortunate that because of the type of lifestyle we have of being in ERs, seeing doctors, having checkups, we then are going really into the epicenter of where it's happening. For me, last year, so more or less how endo works is, depending on the stage, most women find themselves having, I know women who have operations 2 to 3 times a year. For me, it's been, I think, every 3 years. Yeah, the way I see it, every 3 years. It's also because I'm very stubborn. I'm the type of person who's like, you will only cut me if I am like almost dying. You know, I'm not a cut person, because I understand, again, like we said, it's a chronic condition. So you're only masking the symptoms. And so last year, when COVID started, I just gotten engaged. And my doctor for years has been saying, oh my gosh, I can't wait till that happens. And then we can work on the baby and go on to something else. And so I went for the appointment, thinking we were starting to do the baby plan, because I've been on contraception for so long that there's so much that needs to be done. And we do a scan, and things are looking pretty bad. And COVID, I think that week was when we had our first shutdown in March. And she's booked me for surgery. And now she says we can't do the surgery. And so for the whole of 2020, I was literally waiting for her to say, we can do it. And that never happened, because we were in lockdown till, I think we opened up slightly in August, and then we went back and etc. And I was just getting worse and worse and worse. And came January now, things became so bad that I couldn't walk, I couldn't eat. And we were then put into another shutdown. You know how our shutdown, we keep getting them and they close, and we go into another serious one. And I called the doctor, and she says, well, I'm closed. And I remember my hubby had to actually drive there to say, this is not a joke. She's not okay. You need to see her. And so I saw her, and I'm being told, okay, Tine, because yours is an emergency situation, they will admit you. We can do the surgery, but you do know the cons. That any hospital you're going to, they're basically filled with COVID-19 patients. And so for women like me, they call them non-elective surgeries, because you're not dying, you're just in pain. But for me, it got to the point where my organs were fused, so it was looking very, very bad. Anyway, I ended up having the operation done in South Africa, and I thank God everything went well, but it was extremely scary, you know, because they kept on telling me before I got into hospital, I had to do a COVID test. In fact, you fly before you have to do a COVID test. You go into hospital, you have to do a COVID test. Before you leave, you have to do a COVID test. And every time you're so scared, and you're like, I've just had a major surgery. I'm so vulnerable. I cannot catch COVID. And I was supposed to be in hospital for some time. I was in a lot of pain, but I kind of pretended and said, no, it's not too bad. Please let me go, because I'd rather be in a environment where I can control. So I was in Cape Town for about 3 weeks in an Airbnb. And so what I'll do is just go for checkups. So in that regard, it's pretty hard, because you sit down and you have to decide whether what you're going through is actually serious, or you're going to wait it out. But at this point, how long are people going to wait? All over the world, I've heard stories of women who are saying they've been waiting for surgeries for 2 years. And whilst you're waiting, the disease is growing and it's growing and it's growing. And so for me, like I said, it was 2020. I ended up getting in 2021 because it was an emergency situation. And we dealt with a very, very bad situation because they couldn't do non-elective surgeries. So in that point, for me personally, that's how it's affected me. Post-op now, I'm still a bit apprehensive about going into doctors' rooms. And so at the moment, I'm pretty much cooped up and doing what I can at home and sort of chatting with the doctors and saying, this is where I'm at. But I definitely am not in like the danger zone that I was in the beginning of the year. Community-wise, in our group, this week, we actually lost a lady to COVID-19. And I don't know if you are in groups, you know how in groups you get so many different things. And I was the type of person who at some point said, I'm not reading COVID-19 news in groups because some stuff is not even real. And I think it awakened something in all of us in our group because we have become a family. A lot of us have met, some of us have not met, but this is over 120 women that get each other and are sisters. And we lost a very, very active sister who, like me, and I think I'm sort of facing survivor's remorse, who like me went in for a procedure and never got out. And I was like, why? She was so young, she was 29, and it's caused a lot of fear in the group. And at this point, we are helping each other by having the conversations, by saying, okay, what are you doing? You've been vaccinated. What has it been like for you? I remember for me, just after I was advised, wait a bit, but I am at the point where I'm like, someone I know died, let me get vaccinated, you know what I mean? And it's also very hard because people have different opinions. But at the end of the day, the reason why we have the support group is to make sure that we survive, that we take care of each other. So it's been a very complex conversation to have, but we are having it and we're just saying, look, let's hear each other out. Let's hear from those who have been vaccinated. When she died, we were clearly told, look, it was a bad situation because it's mixed with endo, it's low immunity, and she hasn't been vaccinated. And so her chances were very, very low. And so that's how we've been dealing with it in a community. They have been some articles, and they do explain that people with certain stages or endo in a certain area are more high risk. But it's scary, and we just have to continue to support each other and to help each other through this. I think that's the only thing we can do because there's no formula to this. Old people go into hospital, they survive. Younger people go into hospital, they don't. And so I think the way we've been looking at it all this time is, it's when COVID ends, or when this happens, but unfortunately, that's not what we've experienced. And so in the endo community, it's pretty scary. And we just have to stay at home and be as careful as we can. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a difficult season. And when I say season, it's not talking about when it ends, because I think we're probably going to roll into a new sort of a different kind of thing or a new beginning, and that will be bittersweet because of what we've been through. And but we wish you well. We wish all of our endo warriors well, and we pray that it will be well with you every day.
Thank you.
And that you will have wisdom in the choices that you make, and you will be led of wisdom. And even though the fear is there and the anxiety is there for everyone right now, that is our hope and prayer, that it will be well with us, and that eventually it will be more well with us than it is not. And, that is our hope with each day that we wake up and we take a new breath. So we've come to the end of our show, and as is our custom, we always ask the author to do a reading. So please share with us what you've prepared for us today, Tine.
So I'm actually going to read the very last chapter of the book, just because of the season that we are in. And I think another thing I can sort of outline is that sometimes, when people read or think of the book, they think, oh, it's just for women with that condition. No, it touches on so many life issues and life lessons. And so this is sort of the last 3 pages of my book. And it goes, sometimes we have mountains in life that we carry on our backs or try to move. And oh, they can be so hard to move. Sometimes these are just there for us to climb, not to carry. These are ladders to our destinies. Endometriosis was my mountain. And by God's grace, I stopped carrying the mountain and have begun to climb it instead. This mountain was not supposed to be carried. It was a ladder. And when I reached to the top, I would find myself and my purpose. The pain has made me a leader, created amazing organizations, and molded me into a warrior. This mountain has started the conversation about endometriosis in Zimbabwe. The support group is now supporting over 100 women, and it continues to grow. My journey has made me realize the most important things in life, like good health, self-love, and helping others. When you have limited time, you start to spend more time on the things that actually matter. It used to bother me that I couldn't do as much as my peers did. But then I realized that every minute I had, I was using on something valuable. The time I do get for leisure is spent on people who actually matter and things that matter. Pain is a horrible thing, whether it is emotional or physical pain. But once you understand it and realize it does not serve you, you will be victorious. You do not have to coddle it or be kind to it. Use it to work for you instead of you working for it. In every test, a testimony can be born. My story is not yet finished. I believe it has just started. I am present. My journey continues, but I am hopeful. And now I know that pain can actually be turned into something beautiful, into a stunning force, and into something immensely powerful. I just want to go also to just the end. And I think this also is about what we're talking about, COVID, and all these things are happening in the world, just uncertainty. And I'll continue to say, when you come out of a huge storm, you cannot walk out of it the same person. That's what the storm is about, dear reader. Some storms come to clear our path. The problem is that we get too engulfed in the storm that we don't see the reason behind it. What this journey has taught me thus far is that we have to take the small steps. Whilst in the valley, we still need to move. We need to learn the lessons, or the teachable moments will pass us by. The pain would have been for nothing. Pain comes in many forms, but it's still pain, physical or mental. You may not have endometriosis. You may be facing something else, and I know you feel the pressure, but you can get through this. So, what is your story? What pain are you carrying that you're going to turn into power? You are a warrior more than you know. So I picked bits and pieces so people can actually go and buy the book. This is not the whole book, but bits and pieces. And I feel just in the season that we're in, just to remember that we're going through a lot of stuff. We hear all these quotes that say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, etc. And it's hard. It's easier said than done, but the truth is that a lot of the times when we're facing issues, we carry them here, and we don't really look at them and say, okay, what is this trying to teach me? I think even with the pandemic, it's taught us to be more intentional, to love harder, to do the things that truly matter. I always laugh with some of my endo sisters that, you know, this staying at home thing was not new for us, you know, because we stay at home a lot. And for a lot of people, it's been very, very hard. And we've actually been able to help a few people and be like, you know what, you'll be fine if you stay at home. And so writing this book, you never know that, you know, you're going to be in a whole pandemic. And some of it might actually help people going through the pandemic and just patience, you know. Imagine I've been experiencing this for almost 15 years. And every year, you know, the goal and the resolution is that I'm going to have a pain-free year. And sometimes it doesn't happen that way, but it also doesn't mean life doesn't stop. So you learn to dance in the rain, you know. So that's what the book is about. And I hope people will purchase it and learn from it. And something, some way in the book will touch you and you'll be like, okay, this one was for me.
Yeah, definitely a worthwhile read, and definitely I think something that's important for everyone, men, women, people from all different walks of life, to learn about and to be aware about, so that we can do more, and that when we do the more, we are educated and equipped in that support that we're giving. Anyway, it's been lovely chatting with you, Tine. It was
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
and thank you so much for supporting us as writers. Whenever somebody comes to me, I'm like, Selena, she's your girl. Thank you so much for making it worthwhile. You know, I feel excited to write a new book because I know there is support out there. So thank you so much as well for being that person to us.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to keep telling, celebrating the stories, and we're going to keep finding as many ways as possible to make them more visible, so that people who are looking for them will find it easier to find them. So thank you very much for writing, and thank you for continuing to write.
Have a blessed evening.
Yeah, to everybody who's been watching, it's been good to spend this evening again with you. We'll be back here next week, Wednesday at 7 p.m. with another amazing African storyteller. Let's see you all here next week. Cheers. Good night. Stay safe and stay